The storm had started around dusk, slow at first, just light flurries brushing the windows. By 10, the road was buried. At midnight, someone knocked. Not on the front doors, on the side window near the vending machine. I saw him standing there, shoulders hunched. No car in sight, coat heavy with snow. He didn't wave or speak, just waited, staring in through the glass like he already knew I was the only one watching. Let me know where you're listening from tonight, and if you've ever worked alone during a storm. And if these stories keep you company, feel free to follow, so you don't miss the next one. My name's Dana Ellis. I was 37 when this happened, working the night shift at a lodge just north of Fairplay, Colorado. It was one of those rustic ski lodge places, not fancy, but old enough to feel like it had seen some things. The owners were good people, and the job paid well enough. Winters were long, the guests mostly kept to themselves, and I didn't mind the quiet. I'd gone through a divorce a few years earlier, and being up there in the mountains, far from all the noise and mess, felt like the reset I needed. That night was a Tuesday in January. It had been snowing off and on all week, but the forecast said nothing about the blizzard that hit us after sunset. By 9, the phones had cut out. By 10, the highway was a ghost. No more check-ins, no more plows, just wind screaming down from the ridge like it had a score to settle. There were only 4 occupied rooms that night, all checked in by dinner time. Most of the lights in the lobby were off, except for the lamp near the desk, and a few old sconces flickering along the hallway. It was just me and Len, our overnight maintenance guy, who usually disappeared around 11, unless something broke. We had a rhythm. He'd finish his rounds, make a pot of coffee, and head down to the basement office to listen to the radio and read old paperbacks until morning. I'd hold down the front desk, clean up a bit, and maybe watch a movie if it was slow. It was slow that night until it wasn't. I was finishing up the books from the day, just me and the hum of the heater, when I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. The security camera for the side of the building, the one that overlooked the vending machine alcove, flickered for a second, then froze. I tapped the monitor casing, but the screen stayed blank. A few minutes later, I heard it. A single knock. Not loud, not hurried, just one slow knock on the glass. I stood up, walked around the desk, and looked down the hallway that led to the vending machines. Through the frosted side window, I could barely make out a figure. Heavy coat hood up, no snowshoes, standing in inches of powder. I couldn't tell if he was looking at me or just through the window. I opened the hallway door a crack enough to call out without letting in the cold. We're closed to walk-ins. Storms shut down the road. No answer. Just that stillness, like he hadn't even heard me. Then after a long pause, he lifted one arm and pointed toward the ground like he was asking to be let in, but without using words. I should have said no. I should have called Len and had him take a look, but something about the man's stillness made me uneasy, in a way I couldn't name, not threatening exactly. Just off. Against my better judgment, I unlocked the side entrance and cracked it open. The man stepped forward without speaking. He was tall, late 50s maybe, with pale skin and thin lips. Snow clung to his coat and eyebrows. His boots were soaked through. He held out a credit card with gloved fingers, but didn't make eye contact. No luggage, no backpack, just the card and the clothes on his back. I asked him for ID. He said lost it. I asked for a phone number. He shook his head. I looked at the name on the card. It was worn letters half scratched away. The last name looked like Caro, or maybe Carson. I typed it in as Mr. C and gave him one of the lower-level rooms, 104, next to the laundry closet, close enough that if anything went wrong, I'd hear it. As I handed him the key card, he took it with a nod, then walked down the hall without another word. His boots left wet prints on the stone tiles, but he moved silently like he was gliding. That was the last time I saw him speak. I stayed at the desk, little longer unsettled. After a while, I got up and walked back toward the laundry to see if I could hear anything through the wall. No TV, no movement, just quiet. Around 1:30 a.m., Len came up from the basement for coffee. I mentioned the late check-in and he frowned. No car out front. I shook my head. He muttered something about people freezing their brains out in storms and went back downstairs. I sat in the office for a while, sipping coffee and trying not to look at the security feed. Camera 3, the one covering the side entrance, stayed black. At 2:08 a.m., I heard something strange, a faint creak like a door opening down the hallway. I looked up. Nothing on the monitors. I stepped out into the hall. Every door was closed. But there was something odd at room 104. The little light on the door's key card reader was glowing red, like someone had tried to enter and failed. I stood there for a second, then knocked. "Sir, everything all right?" No answer. I knocked again, a little louder. Nothing. I considered unlocking it, but something told me not to. I backed away, telling myself it was probably just a misread. Maybe he stepped out and came back in too fast. Maybe the lock glitched in the cold. I went back to the desk. 15 minutes later, the side entrance alarm chirped once. That only happened when someone opened the door from inside. I checked the camera again. Still black. I walked the hallway and looked out the window. There were fresh footprints in the snow heading away from the building down toward the tree line. The man's room key was still on the counter, right where I'd placed it earlier. I hadn't noticed it being returned. I woke Len and told him I thought the guest had walked out into the storm. We searched the area for nearly an hour, flashlights barely cutting through the blowing snow. No figure, no sound, just those deep, solitary footprints trailing off into nothing. They stopped near the edge of the woods, then vanished like he'd been lifted away. When we checked room 104, the bed hadn't been touched. No sign anyone had even entered. The card reader showed no successful entries after I programmed it. By morning, the road was closed. No vehicles had passed during the night, and no reports of missing hikers or walk-ins came through. We reviewed the exterior footage after the storm. Camera 3 was mysteriously blank from midnight to dawn. The rest of the system worked fine. I filed a note about a possible cold exposure case, but we never got any follow-up. No one claimed the room. The credit card never charged. And the name? The card number wasn't tied to any active account. For a while after that, I kept thinking maybe I let in a man who didn't exist. Or maybe he was never really coming inside. Maybe he was just looking for a place to vanish quietly, and I opened the door. I never saw him again. But sometimes when I walk past 104 on stormy nights, I swear I hear that faint knock not at the door, but at the window near the vending machines. Just once. And then silence. I don't usually talk about this. It's one of those stories that sounds like you're just trying to scare someone. But I was there, and I remember every second. The smell of the concrete, the sound the loading bay door made when it rolled up just enough for someone to slip through. I've worked in warehouses my whole adult life, and I've seen some weird things. But that night was different. That night, someone stayed behind who shouldn't have. Back in 2019, I was managing third shift at a logistics center, just outside Allentown. We handled mostly overnight freight incoming pallets, inventory counts, occasional short-haul dispatch. I'd been there almost 10 years, and most nights were the same. Quiet, cold, repetitive. The kind of job where your boots wear down before your patience does. That winter, we'd been short-staffed, and corporate sent us a batch of seasonal temps from a third-party agency. Nothing unusual about that. We'd get a few extra hands around the holidays, train them for a week or two, then they'd disappear by spring. Wesley was one of those temps. Mid-20s, soft-spoken, polite, maybe a little too quiet. He didn't say much unless you asked him something directly, but he showed up on time and worked hard, and that's more than I could say for most. I remember he always wore the same gray hoodie, no matter how cold the building got. Kept his badge clipped to his sleeve instead of his chest, which I thought was odd, but harmless. It was mid-January when things started to feel off. Not all at once, just little things. Wesley clocked in one night, but never checked in at his station. When I asked around, nobody had seen him since he walked through the locker area. Then, an hour later, he showed up pushing a pallet jack like nothing had happened. Said he'd been helping with backstock, but the records didn't show any scans from his ID until just before that moment. I chalked it up to a system lag. The next night, one of the guys swore he saw Wesley upstairs in the admin office hallway, just standing outside the break room staring at the vending machine. The problem was the admin floor was badge restricted, only managers had access. I asked Wesley about it later, and he just blinked and said I got lost. We were on shift together. I knew he'd been on the floor. I didn't press it. The warehouse had this hum to it. You don't really notice it until it stops. The noise of the conveyors, forklifts, backing up, the buzz of overhead lights, it all blends together. But around 2:45 a.m. on a Thursday, everything just paused. The lights flickered. The conveyor jammed and triggered an auto shutdown. And then over the intercom, for maybe 2 seconds, I heard static, not a system alert, just pure static, like someone keyed the mic, but didn't speak. We did a floor sweep after that. I was with 2 other supervisors. Wesley wasn't at his assigned station. We checked the bathrooms, break room, even the cold storage. Nothing. Then one of the guys, Marcus, noticed something weird on the south loading dock camera, a flicker of movement like someone had gone through the emergency stairwell door leading outside. I grabbed my coat and went out with a flashlight. The wind had picked up and the lot was slick with black ice. I saw one set of footprints leading from the door to the far edge of the dock, and stopping just past the yellow hazard line. Not turning, not veering off, just ending like the person vanished mid-stride. Back inside, I filed an incident report and marked Wesley as unaccounted. We figured maybe he slipped out to take a call or got sick and left without clocking out. Security had nothing useful. The badge logs showed no exit, and none of the external doors were opened between midnight and 3:00 a.m. The temp agency tried calling his emergency contact, but the number went straight to voicemail. He didn't return the next night, or the next. That would have been the end of it. Temps walk off all the time. But 3 nights later, the badge scanner near Bay 6 logged an entry from Wesley's ID at 1:13 a.m. It wasn't just a glitch. The system marked it as successful. A valid scan. Except the physical badge had already been turned into HR and locked in a drawer in the front office. I reviewed the footage myself. There was no one on camera. Just the red light on the scanner blinking green, and then nothing. No figure, no shadow. Just the empty hall. I stayed late that night watching the monitors from the dispatch booth. Around 3:00 a.m., the hallway motion sensor outside locker bay 2 activated. Normally that would cue the lights to full brightness, but this time they came on low, just enough to cast shadows. And standing right at the edge of frame, half turned toward the wall, was someone in a gray hoodie. I ran out there with 2 of the shift leads, but the hallway was empty. We searched every bay, every back room, every loading dock. No sign of anyone. But when we pulled the log the next morning, it showed the same ID. Wesley's had been scanned again, this time at the break room entry keypad. We called the police. Officer Brewster came out, took statements, ran a basic sweep. No forced entry, no evidence of trespassing. He was polite, but I could tell he thought we were spooked over nothing. Before he left, he asked to see the badge that had been used. I brought him to the front office and opened the drawer. The badge was gone. After that, people started quitting. First the temps, then one of our veterans. Said they didn't like how the cameras glitched in the same 3 hallways every night around 2:00 a.m. Said they kept hearing footsteps when no one was around. A few even claimed they heard the intercom clicking on in the early hours, just static like before. Corporate told us to keep things quiet. They sent a new set of security protocols, locked certain areas after hours, even replaced the scanner systems. I stayed on a few more months, but I never worked another full shift without keeping one eye on the monitors. I kept watching for that gray hoodie. I never saw it again on camera. But some nights when the air got too still and the overhead hum faded just enough, I swear I'd hear the faint beep of a badge scan, even when no one was scheduled. And one night after a power surge knocked out the eastern wing lights for 10 minutes, I checked the logs the next morning. Under unauthorized entries at 2:13 a.m., one name showed up. Just a first name. Not linked to any current employee profile. Wesley. I used to love staying alone in new places. There was something comforting about having a space entirely to myself. No roommates, no noise, just quiet. But after what happened that weekend near Pawleys Island, I haven't booked a rental by myself since. I still have the old key on my ring. Not the one I was given, the other one. The one I found in my bag after I got home. Back in the fall of 2022, I booked a last-minute trip to the coast to get away from the city and catch up on some client work. I'd been freelancing as a designer for about 4 years by then. Mostly small contracts, brochures, ad layouts, stuff like that. Business had been steady, but life in Charlotte was starting to feel a little too loud. I wanted 3 days of sleep, coffee, and ocean air. I found a listing that looked perfect, a converted guest house behind an older woman's property, right along a quiet stretch of beachfront. Simple furnishings. Porch swing, no neighbors close by. The host's name was Miss Ruth, and in the listing photos, she looked exactly how you'd expect. Silver hair, long skirts, warm eyes. When I pulled in that Friday afternoon, the wind was picking up off the water, and the air smelled like salt and pine needles. Miss Ruth came out onto the porch with a cup of tea and waved. She was in her late 70s, moved a little stiffly, but sharp as anything. We made small talk while she handed me the key, a standard silver one, on a little red plastic tag labeled Guest House. I noticed she had another ring of keys on her hip, heavy and clinking when she walked. She told me to knock if I needed anything, but said she usually went to bed by 9. After that, I'd have the place to myself. The first night was uneventful. I made pasta, answered a few emails, and sat on the porch until the mosquitoes found me. Around midnight, I turned off the lamp and lay in bed with the window cracked just enough to hear the waves. It was the kind of dark you only get away from street lights, soft, complete. I drifted off around 1. Sometime later, I woke up to the sound of footsteps on the porch outside. Not rushing, not sneaky, just slow, deliberate steps crossing the wood. At first, I thought maybe Miss Ruth had come by for some reason, but there was no knock. Just the quiet creak of the floorboards as someone stopped near the front door and stayed there. I held my breath and waited. After maybe a minute, I heard the sound of the doorknob turning, not shaking, not forced, just tested, like someone had a key. I stayed frozen in bed, barely blinking. The lock held. The knob turned once more, then stopped. After that, nothing. No retreating footsteps, just silence. The next morning, I chalked it up to a dream, maybe an animal or the wind. But when I stepped outside, there was a faint, wet print on the top porch step, shaped like a shoe. It was already drying in the sun. I didn't say anything to Miss Ruth, but I drove into town that afternoon and bought one of those little rubber door stoppers and wedged it under the door before bed, just in case. That night, I stayed up later working. Around 2:00 a.m., I went to rinse a mug in the sink and noticed something odd out the window. The motion light on the back corner of the main house was on. There wasn't any wind, no swaying branches nearby, just a sharp pool of white light shining against the side fence. I watched for a few minutes. Nothing moved. Eventually, it went dark again. I didn't sleep well. Every creak of the house felt too loud. Around 3:30, I heard something, a faint sound like a zipper being pulled slowly. I thought maybe it came from outside, maybe just a critter rooting through the bin. I tried to shake it off. The next morning, I packed early. I still had one night left, but I decided to check out a day ahead. I told Miss Ruth that a client needed me back sooner. She didn't seem surprised, just smiled and offered me some extra fruit for the drive. It wasn't until I got home that I found the other key. I was unpacking my tote bag, the one I used for groceries and laundry, when I found it sitting in the side pocket, a brass key with no tag, slightly scratched, and not mine. I knew my rental key. It was silver, standard cut, with the little red label. This one was different. No tag, just a key. I texted Miss Ruth and asked if it might be hers, something that got mixed in accidentally. She replied quickly, "No, dear, all my keys are accounted for. Hope you got home safe." That was it. I should have let it go. But something about that weekend kept bothering me. A few days later, I drove back down the coast, not to stay, just to ask around. I stopped at the gas station a mile from Miss Ruth's house, the only one open late. The clerk was young, bored-looking, But when I mentioned her name, he raised an eyebrow. That the place with the red porch swing? I nodded. He didn't say much, just that a few years back there'd been trouble at a property out that way. A renter claimed someone had come into the guest house while she was sleeping. Nothing was taken. But she woke up to the sound of the front door closing. Police never found any sign of forced entry. The woman left the next morning and never came back. I asked if the guy had ever heard who it was. Someone breaking in, a neighbor, maybe. He just shrugged and said, "Could have been anybody. But if someone's got a key, it ain't really breaking in, is it?" That night, I checked the red plastic tag again. It wasn't attached to the silver key anymore. Somehow, it had cracked in half inside my coat pocket, just split clean down the middle like it had been twisted. I keep both keys in a drawer now, one with the tag, one without. I don't know where the second one came from or how it ended up in my bag, but I know I didn't bring it, and I know the door only turned because someone expected it to open. Back in high school, the county fair was one of the few things we actually looked forward to. It came through every September like clockwork, same creaky rides, same loud music, same smell of corn dogs and diesel. That year, 2007, it was the last one before graduation. Me and my two closest friends, Charlie and Denny, made a whole night of it. It wasn't supposed to be anything special, just a Friday night out, one last fall tradition before we all split off to different schools. But there's this one photo from that night, a strip of 4 black and white squares taken in a booth near the south lot. I still have it, but it doesn't look right anymore. There's a space where someone should be standing, and I remember exactly who was there. The fairgrounds sat about 15 minutes outside Wichita, a long, flat stretch off Route 96 that backed up against the edge of some commercial farmland. At night, the place always looked a little eerie. Too many shadows behind tents, too many lights that hummed just a little too loud. But when you're a teenager, that sort of thing just adds to the fun. We got there around 8. Crowds were thin by then, mostly families heading home. The good stuff happened later anyway. That year they'd added a new haunted house maze, so that was our first stop. Took us about 20 minutes to get through it, mostly because Denny kept trying to scare Charlie instead of moving forward. We laughed about it the whole way to the food stands. I remember the temperature dropped fast that night. The sky had that purplish glow. It gets in Kansas after a hot day cools too quickly. Around 9:30, we passed this old-fashioned photo booth wedged between a caricature tent and a shaved ice trailer. Not one of those sleek digital ones. This was the kind with the accordion curtain and the coin slot that stuck halfway in unless you jiggled it. The booth was painted red, peeling in places, but still working. You could hear the whir of the film mechanism, even from outside. There was a girl leaning against the side of it, maybe our age, maybe a little younger. Black hoodie, silver backpack, chewing on a stir straw. She smiled when we passed and said something about the booth being weird but cool. I smiled back and asked if it worked. She nodded. "You just have to hit it first," she said, then smacked the top of it with the flat of her hand. The little green light blinked on. Her name was Ava. We talked for a couple of minutes just messing around. She said she was waiting for her cousin, but it was hard to tell if that was true. She had that easy way some people have, like they're always halfway out the door, not really planning to stick around. Charlie, of course, tried flirting. She smiled at him but didn't say much. After a few minutes, she asked if we wanted a photo. We crammed into the booth, 4 of us. It was tighter than it looked. I ended up on the left, Denny beside me, Ava in the middle, and Charlie on the right. She leaned forward just before the first flash. I remember the way her hand brushed my knee, not on purpose, just space being what it was. We took the strip and stepped out. The photo slid out about 20 seconds later, warm and a little curled. 4 flashes, 4 frames. Only 3 of us in the picture. At first, we thought maybe she leaned too far forward or ducked her head, but no. There was just empty space between us. A little blur of light where her shoulder had been, but nothing else. Her name wasn't on the strip, obviously. Just us 3, making dumb faces, standing closer than we remembered. Charlie looked confused. He flipped the strip over, checked the machine. Ava just laughed. "Guess I broke it," she said. We turned around to ask if she wanted to try another, but she was already gone. The fairgrounds weren't that big, especially near the food courts, but we didn't see her again. We walked the loop twice, looked by the haunted house, even checked the ticket counter. Nothing. It wasn't until later that we started realizing how strange it really was. Denny swore he never saw her face clearly, said the lights inside the booth flickered too much. Charlie remembered the smell of her hair, something sweet like apple gum, but couldn't agree on what she was wearing. I said silver backpack. Charlie said canvas tote. We argued about it most of the way back to the car. The weirdest part came the next morning. I'd stuck the photo strip in my wallet and forgot about it until I cleaned my jeans. When I pulled it out, the last frame was different. It had changed. You could still see the 3 of us, but that space in the middle wasn't just empty anymore. There was a faint shadow, like the exposure had picked something up. Not a person exactly, more like the outline of one. A dark smear the shape of a hood right where Ava had been sitting. I took it to school and showed a few people. Most of them just laughed. One guy said I probably got a bad chemical batch that those old booths mess up all the time. But later that week, Officer Delgado, a family friend of Charlie's, came by our campus to speak to the forensics class. He's the one who made it real. Charlie pulled him aside, half joking, and asked if a photo could change after it developed. Delgado looked at the strip, studied it for a minute, then got quiet. He asked where we'd taken it and when. We told him. He asked what the girl looked like. We tried to explain dark, hoodie, shoulder-length hair, soft voice. He didn't say much after that, just told Charlie to hang on to the picture and not post it anywhere. The next day, Delgado called my mom, said he needed to speak to me alone. I met him at the station after school. He told me very carefully that there had been a missing persons report filed at that same fairground 2 years earlier. A girl named Ava Holbrook, 17, went missing just after closing on the last night of the fair. No signs of struggle, no leads, just vanished. She'd been waiting for a ride from her cousin, who never showed. The last confirmed sighting was near the south lot, close to the photo booth. No camera footage, no phone activity, nothing. I asked if he thought it was the same girl. He said probably not. Probably a coincidence. But his tone didn't match the words. A week later, the booth was gone. No explanation, just gone. In its place was a sandwich board for a cotton candy stand. When I asked the fair coordinator, she said they hadn't had a photo booth on that row in years. Said they used to, but it stopped working too often, so they scrapped it after 2005. I didn't say anything else, just nodded. I still have the photo strip. It lives in the bottom drawer of my desk. The shadow in the last frame has gotten darker over time. Or maybe that's just how I remember it. I've looked up Ava Holbrook a few times since then. There's not much online. A missing flyer scanned at low resolution. A candlelight vigil photo from 2007. A few comments from classmates wondering where she went. But every fall when the fair rolls around again, I think about that night. About the blur between us in the photo and the way the machine hummed right before the flash. I wonder if we caught something we weren't supposed to, or if the booth was never meant to show us who was really there. And I wonder if somewhere out there, there's another photo. One where she's the only one who came out clear. I've worked roadside repair most of my life, and I've seen just about every kind of breakdown there is: blown axles, jackknifed trailers, drivers so tired they could barely speak. But every once in a while you get called out to something that doesn't feel mechanical, something that doesn't add up even when all the parts look fine. That stretch of Route 267 near Goldfield, it's quiet most nights, too quiet. And what happened out there in the fall of 2021 still doesn't sit right with me. I was 52 at the time, still doing overnight dispatch work for a small private recovery outfit contracted through the state. The hours were long, but the solitude never bothered me. You keep the truck stocked, keep your ears on the radio, and the desert pretty much leaves you alone. Most nights it's dead, maybe one call, maybe none. That night it was just before midnight when my CB chirped with a patch through from state dispatch. The operator sounded tired, not unusual, but her tone shifted when she gave me the location. Mile marker 118, northbound. No details, just a possible heavy rig stalled in-lane lights off, not responding to calls. I was maybe 40 minutes out, headed southbound, so I flipped around at the next junction and started toward the site. The road out there doesn't have much in the way of light. No service stations, no motels, not even the old diner that used to run off a generator. Just low brush, blacktop, and the hum of your own engine. The wind had picked up by then, kicking dust across the shoulder and making the high beams flicker every few seconds. When I got within a quarter mile, I slowed. I could see a dark shape up ahead, dead center in the right lane. No flashers, no hazard cones. Just a four-door truck, looked like a late-model Dodge, stopped completely sideways across both lanes, like it had spun and come to rest. I eased up behind it, switched on my roof lights, and stepped out. The cab was empty. No sign of movement, no dome light, no engine running. The keys were still in the ignition, turned to the first position, and the driver's side door was cracked open, maybe 4 inches. I called out twice. Nothing. The inside smelled faintly of burned plastic and something else, something bitter, almost like ammonia. Not a strong smell, but strange. I walked a slow circle around the truck, checked for damage. No impact marks, no tire blowout. But something about the way it was parked bothered me. There were no skid marks, no signs of sudden braking. It was as if someone had just let it drift into place and walked away. I radioed dispatch to confirm the plate. The tag came back flagged as stolen out of Henderson, reported missing earlier that same day. I told them I was staying on scene until highway patrol arrived. then climbed back into my rig and waited with the headlights on it. The truck just sat there, half-shadowed, front wheels, slightly turned door, never moving. About 15 minutes later, I spotted movement on the opposite shoulder, far side of the desert brush, maybe 100 yards out. Two figures, both male by the look of it, walking slowly along the edge of the low ridgeline. No lights, no flash, just silhouettes moving parallel to the road, never turning, never signaling for help. I hit the high beams and flashed them twice. Nothing. They just kept walking. I radioed dispatch again and gave them the direction northeast behind the ridgeline. The operator went quiet for a moment, then asked if I could confirm whether the men matched the description from the stolen vehicle alert. I asked what that description was. She paused, then said, "There wasn't one." By the time Highway Patrol pulled up, the men were gone. Patrol swept the area, walked the brush, even took a drone up an hour later when backup arrived. No footprints, no tire tracks, just wind-swept sand and the abandoned truck. Officer Reyes, one of the first on scene, asked if I was sure I'd seen two men. I said I was. One taller than the other, both walking like they knew exactly where they were going, like they didn't want to be seen, but also didn't care if they were. The patrol officers popped the truck's glove box and found something strange, a receipt from a gas station in Beatty, time-stamped just 2 hours before the vehicle was reported stolen. Paid in cash, signature line blank. No prints on the doors, no phone, no personal items inside. After my statement, I stuck around to help tow the vehicle off the road. As we winched it onto the flatbed, one of the troopers found something. I hadn't noticed a cheap prepaid phone wedged under the passenger seat, powered off. It only had one outgoing number in the call log. It was to the Highway Patrol's non-emergency line. Placed at 9:42 p.m., nearly 2 hours before the dispatcher sent me out. I was back at the lot by 3:00 a.m., still turning it over in my head. I know what I saw. Two men walking away from a truck that didn't look wrecked, didn't look broken, just left. The kind of quiet exit that's more intentional than panicked. A few days later, I asked a buddy with the patrol office if anything more came of it. He said the truck had been wiped down. No DNA, no new sightings, just another ghost vehicle dumped in the desert like someone wanted it to be found but not solved. And the phone. It went missing from evidence before the techs could finish the forensics. Just gone. I've worked plenty of calls since then, some stranger. But I keep thinking about the way those two moved, calm, steady, like they weren't lost. And how the first call about that vehicle came through before anyone even saw it, like maybe they'd already walked away and just wanted to leave something behind. I don't usually talk about this. Driving a cab at night, you learn to file away strange encounters, the way factory workers learn to tune out the sound of machinery. It keeps you sane. But there was one night that never filed away neatly. It stayed jagged in my mind, like a piece of glass you can't quite set down without cutting yourself. I had been driving the late shift for a company that still ran those yellow Crown Vics out of a depot near Union Station. Most of my fares at that hour were predictable airport runs, bar drunks, the occasional nurse finishing up a 12-hour shift. I knew the rhythm of the city at night when the glass towers went dark and the freight trains echoed through the industrial corridors. There was comfort in that rhythm, the steady predictability of neon signs flickering street lamps, and the faint hum of the radio dispatch keeping me company. The night this happened, it was about 2 in the morning. A mist had settled low over the city, the kind that turned streetlights into pale orange halos and made everything look a little less real. I had just dropped off a fare near the West Bottoms when dispatch crackled in asking if I could handle a pickup a few blocks east. The details were vague. A man had called in from a payphone, one of the last still standing in front of an old warehouse building. That alone caught my attention. Almost nobody used a payphone anymore. When I pulled up, I saw him standing there under the harsh glow of a single bulb above the warehouse door. He was dressed in a gray jacket that looked a size too big, with his hands buried deep in the pockets. He didn't wave me down or even look up right away, just stood with his head lowered, the fog curling around him. I should have driven off, but he finally turned and approached the car with a steady, deliberate walk that made it clear he had been waiting for me specifically. He slid into the back seat without saying a word. The first thing I noticed was the smell, faint but sharp, like old metal and wet paper. When I asked where he was headed, his voice came low and even. "Drive east. I'll tell you when to turn." His tone wasn't threatening, but there was a certainty in it that set me on edge. Most drunks rambled, and most night people at least made small talk. This man didn't. We drove through the industrial grid, past silent loading docks and long stretches of chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. My headlights barely pierced the fog, and every so often I glanced up at the rear-view mirror. He wasn't fidgeting, wasn't looking at his phone, wasn't even watching the passing streets. He just stared straight ahead with that same stillness, as if the motion of the car didn't concern him at all. After about 10 minutes, I finally asked Half to break the silence. Half because I couldn't stand the quiet. "You got somewhere specific in mind?" His answer was slow, deliberate. "You'll know it when we're there." That didn't make any sense, and I felt my pulse quicken, but I kept driving. Something in his tone made it feel less like a conversation and more like an instruction. The deeper we went, the emptier the streets became. Street lights grew fewer, and the fog thickened around the warehouses until the city felt erased, as though I had slipped into some forgotten district that wasn't meant for people anymore. He told me to turn left, then right, guiding me in a zigzag pattern that felt designed to disorient. I drove past buildings with boarded-up windows and graffiti tags, past rusting rail cars, sitting idle on tracks that hadn't been used in years. My fuel light blinked on, and I remember thinking I should insist on stopping soon, but the words stuck in my throat. Eventually, he told me to pull over near an intersection that led nowhere. The street ended in a chain-link gate with a faded "no trespassing" sign. I parked waiting for him to get out, but he didn't move. He leaned forward slightly, his face catching the weak glow of the dash lights for the first time. His eyes looked normal enough, but there was something wrong in the way he studied me, like he was memorizing a face he already knew too well. "Why did you leave her there?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. My stomach tightened instantly. "Excuse me," I managed, though my mouth had gone dry. His gaze didn't falter. "You should have gone back. You should have stayed." I didn't know what he was talking about. No passenger, no incident in my past matched those words, but he said them with such certainty that for one terrible second I felt a rush of guilt, as if I really had abandoned someone once and buried it so deep I'd convinced myself it never happened. Before I could respond, he leaned back again, settling into the shadows. "You can drive me now," he murmured. "You'll take me where I need to go." My hands were shaking on the wheel as I started the car, not knowing what else to do. He guided me again, block by block, until we reached a run-down gas station lit by buzzing fluorescent lights. He finally told me to stop there. I pulled up, half expecting him to vanish into the mist, but instead he opened the door slowly and stepped out. He bent down to look at me through the open window, his face unreadable. "You'll see me again," he said quietly, then walked inside the gas station. I sat there for several minutes, engine idling, trying to steady my breathing. When I finally went inside to pay for gas, the clerk gave me a strange look. I asked about the man who'd just walked in. The clerk frowned. "What man?" he said. I told him a passenger had just stepped out of my cab. The clerk shook his head. "You pulled in alone. I've been watching since you parked." I don't remember the drive back into the city. My memory skips like a broken tape. I only know that when I checked with dispatch later, they had no record of a call from that payphone. In fact, the phone line had been disconnected for years. I kept driving nights for a while, but the work never felt the same after that. Every time I see fog rolling low over the warehouses, I find myself glancing at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see him sitting there again. And sometimes late at night when I'm parked waiting on a fare, I catch myself hearing his voice in the quiet, asking me again why I left her there. I was renting my first apartment when this happened, a brick complex built in the 70s on the edge of Ann Arbor. The walls were thin, the parking lot lights flickered, and the laundry room always smelled faintly of mildew. It wasn't much, but it was affordable, and at 19 I didn't expect comfort so much as independence. The place was quiet at night except for my downstairs neighbor in Unit 1A. He was older, maybe late 40s, with a permanent slump in his shoulders. I never caught his name, though he nodded politely whenever we passed on the stairwell. He kept to himself, and I assumed he worked odd hours since his blinds were always drawn, and I heard muffled movement well after midnight. One night in November, I was up late debugging a project when I heard a knock, not at my door, but at his. The sound carried strangely through the old walls, a soft, deliberate tapping, as if someone were trying not to disturb the rest of the building. I waited for the sound of his door opening, but the knock repeated 3 times. In perfect rhythm, then stopped. 10 minutes later, it came again, quieter this time, and then again, closer to dawn. It happened the next night, too, and the next. Always the same soft knocks at his door between 2 and 4 in the morning, never followed by voices, never answered by him. By the 5th night, I pressed my ear to the floor, when it started hoping to catch a word or a shuffle of movement. All I heard was the same measured rhythm, like someone with infinite patience was waiting to be let in. Curiosity got the better of me, so the next evening I stopped by his apartment at a reasonable hour. I knocked once, heard nothing, then again. Finally, his voice drifted through the door, low, tired, but firm. Not tonight. It wasn't meant for me. There was no mistaking the resignation in it, the kind of tone you'd use with someone you'd already refused 100 times. The nightly knocks continued, and I started losing sleep. One morning, after hearing them drag on for nearly an hour, I checked outside. The walkway was empty, the frost on the railings unbroken. No footprints, no shadows, no sign anyone had been there. 2 weeks later, I came home from class to find police cars outside. The door to Unit 1A was open yellow tape stretched across the frame. I asked an officer what had happened, but he only said there'd been an incident. I never saw my neighbor again. That night, for the first time, the knocks came to my door. 3 soft raps, perfectly spaced, just after 2 in the morning. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. When the silence stretched, I thought maybe I'd imagined it. Then it came again, softer, as though the knuckles were pressing right against the wood near my ear. I never opened that door. Eventually, the knocks stopped coming, though I still dream about them sometimes. What unsettles me most isn't that they started at my apartment, but that whoever or whatever had been visiting Unit 1A seemed content to wait until his door was no longer there to move on to mine. That was the last story I wanted to share tonight. Thinking back over all these accounts, what stays with me isn't the moments of fear themselves, but the silences that followed them. An empty road after headlights vanish, a room still echoing with footsteps, or the quiet pause after a knock goes unanswered. These are the places our minds return to long after the events themselves are gone. None of the people in these stories set out looking for the strange or the terrifying. They were working night shifts, taking trips, or simply living their lives in ordinary spaces that should have been safe. Yet something slipped in through the cracks, an unanswered question. A figure glimpsed too late or a pattern too precise to be coincidence. Maybe that's why such stories stay with us. They remind us that the unsettling isn't always loud or obvious. Sometimes it waits in the background, patient and unhurried, leaving just enough room for us to notice when the familiar turns unfamiliar. And once you notice, you can never entirely go back. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. I hope these stories have given you something to think about as the night settles in. If you'd like to hear more, please subscribe to the channel. Share this with a friend and join me for future nights. And tell me, have you ever heard a sound at your door in the small hours, one you couldn't quite explain?